The Stoic philosophers cautioned against associating with certain types of people who can negatively impact our lives. In this video, I will discuss 13 categories of people that Stoicism encourages us to avoid. If you have relationships with individuals exhibiting these harmful behaviors, consider removing them from your life. Before covering the 13 types, I want to thank you for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like and subscribe for more content about applying Stoic principles. Hitting the notification bell will alert you to new videos aimed at personal growth through Stoicism. I appreciate your viewership and support. Number 1. The passive-aggressive. One type of person that does not deserve much of your time are the passive-aggressive, those who express their hostility in subtle, underhanded ways instead of openly and directly. You can usually detect these people from their tendency to sulk, make backhanded remarks, ignore requests, procrastinate, or simply pretend not to hear something they don't want to deal with. For example, perhaps you ask a passive-aggressive coworker for assistance with a project. They smile and agree, but somehow never seem to get around to actually helping. Or when confronted with a complaint, they might say something mildly self-deprecating like, "Oh, I guess I'm just incompetent. Feel free to do everything yourself from now on." They find little ways to frustrate and provoke, while still maintaining plausible deniability about their real intentions. As the Stoic philosophers recognized, we have limited time and energy to give to others. These kinds of unhealthy relationships only serve to drain us. Our patience and empathy are precious resources meant for those earnest few who truly need them, not to be squandered on the petty games of passive-aggressive types. Rising above the subtle toxicity of passive aggression requires discipline and vigilance. We must clearly communicate our boundaries to these kinds of difficult people. Where possible, limit contact or avoid them altogether. Seek healthier connections instead. Our time does not deserve to be hijacked by undermining insinuations or endless guessing games. There is so much positive change we could effect in the world with those same mental cycles. In this way, the Stoics call us to guard our inner domains, to let no one control our emotional state without our conscious permission. This allows us to act from wisdom, justice, and self-respect rather than being goaded into resentment or rashness. By refusing to enable dysfunctional behaviors in others, we model positive change from a centered place of calm strength. Number 2. The judgmental. The judgmental are another type of person that does not deserve an abundance of your time and energy. These are the hypocritical individuals who seem to have an opinion on everyone else's personal choices and lifestyle. They look at others through a lens of condemnation rather than comprehension. For example, judgmental people might aggressively question why someone doesn't have a prestigious, high-paying job, why they aren't married by a certain age, or why they live in a modest apartment rather than lavish house. They attack people's interests and hobbies if they seem outside the mainstream. Even small things like fashion choices tend to land under their scrutinizing glare. Essentially, the judgmental appoint themselves both prosecuting attorney and jury over other people's way of life. The Stoic philosophers would caution us not to get embroiled in their dogmatism and pettiness. We all have our own journey with enough struggles and complexities. How others find meaning is not ours to critique, especially in such an unproductive, destructive manner. Rising above judgment requires embracing empathy, nuance, and humility. We must recognize that behind even the most questionable outward choices often lie pain or misunderstandings worthy of compassion. Also, we would do well to consider that rarely do these kinds of harsh judges live up to their own standards. Their criticism of others usually stems from insecurity and unresolved inner turmoil, rather than wisdom worthy of respect. The Stoics remind us that life is too short and beautiful to dedicate our mental space to those dedicated to bitterness, superiority, and toxic negativity. We must be wise in discernment of how we spend our limited time. Seeking those who inspire our better angels bears far more delicious fruit than attempting to please the judgmental. Our energy is better spent creating, exploring, comforting, and learning rather than defending and reacting. Number 3. The pessimistic. The pessimists are a type of person that Stoic philosophers would encourage us to invest limited time and energy into. These are the individuals with a glass half-empty view of most situations. They only see the negative and quickly give up hope. For example, when faced with any kind of setback or challenge, the pessimist throws up their hands and says, "Oh well, we already failed. Why even bother trying?" They envision the very worst-case scenario coming true at every turn. If the weather forecast calls for a 30% chance of rain, they obsess over the madness of going outdoors under such a torrential downpour. They shoot down innovative ideas and ambitious goals by fixating on all that could go wrong. Now, the Stoics would distinguish between thoughtful caution and useless gloominess. Prudence and clear-eyed risk assessment are virtues, but ceaseless fretting over hypothetical worst-case scenarios helps no one. All significant achievements require tuning out the chorus of voices screaming, "You'll never make it." Additionally, surrounding ourselves with naysayers and doomsday prophets only dampens our spirits and drive. Their bleak inner world becomes an oppressive cloud blocking out the sunlight of hope. The Stoics advise we instead seek positive-minded, solution-focused companions, those able to hold setbacks and hardship as inevitable teachers rather than existential threats. Our time is precious. We must judiciously direct it only toward those who fan the flames of courage and possibility within us. For pessimists, sap far more energy than they provide. They interpret every stumble as the universe confirming their belief in failure as the natural order. Whereas the wise know that within every obstacle lies an opportunity, if we approach it with resourcefulness rather than resignation. In this way, we must leave the pessimist to shudder in the shadows while we boldly walk in the sun's replenishing light. Number 4. The pretentious. The pretentious also make the list of people not deserving of our precious time, according to the Stoic philosophers. These are individuals attempting to impress others by making themselves seem more important or cultured than they really are. You can usually recognize the pretentious by their subtle but constant attempts to center the conversation on themselves and their alleged achievements. They might casually drop mentions of the celebrity they supposedly met or famous location they visited as if it's commonplace. Yet when questioned for details, they grow vague or defensive. In reality, they are often deeply insecure people overcompensating through false appearances and name-dropping. Beyond conversation, the pretentious also display their undeserved self-importance through material goods. They feel the constant need to show off garish status symbols far beyond their actual means. Luxury cars on credit, huge mansion-like homes filled with tacky decor, $1,000 outfits while their bills go unpaid. The Stoics would call us to look past these superficial trappings to discern people's true character and wisdom. The reason pretentious people drain us is because maintaining facades is utterly exhausting. It takes tremendous energy to prop up an illusion. There's no opportunity for authentic connection or vulnerability which nourishes the soul. The pretentious also tend to surround themselves with sycophants to believe the hype, rather than genuine friends. Once you prove unwilling to buy into exaggerated self-mythology, they quickly move on in search of more credulous ears. In the end, there's no substance behind pretentiousness, just a thin veil of bravado hiding deep bitterness over wasted time and talent. The Stoics advise us to instead spend our hours engaged with those dedicated to growth in authentic knowledge and virtue rather than appearances. For in such sincere company, our spirits will flourish. Number 5. The hypocritical. The hypocritical represent another group the Stoic philosophers advise us to be wary of investing our precious time into. As the name suggests, these are individuals who pretend to embody certain virtues, principles, or beliefs, but whose actions betray a lack of true integrity when push comes to shove. You can detect these fair-weather values holders from the mismatch between their lofty words and actual deeds. For example, a hypocritical friend might talk endlessly about the importance of loyalty, but then betrays your confidence at the first opportunity. A family member might wax poetic about the priority of forgiveness, yet continues harboring resentments over minor slights from years past. Their flowery rhetoric about ideals rarely withstands the slightest adversity. The Stoics considered hypocrisy a particularly toxic trait, as it spreads like a virus through fraudulent appearances. When we assume roles and mouths platitudes without earnestly striving to embody them, it engenders wider cultural cynicism and apathy. People shrug off the most virtuous principles as mere empty words, when too many wolves don their sheep's clothing. The only inoculation against hypocrisy is humility and honesty. Rather than seeking to appear righteous, we must commit to the lifelong path of sincerely becoming so through action refined by accountability. This requires surrounding ourselves with people of genuine virtue, willing to speak hard truths in love, rather than more mirror-holding pretenders. For in such sincere company, our spirits are edified and integrity strengthened. Of course, no one achieves moral perfection in this life. We all fall short of even our own ideals at times. However, the Stoics call us to choose leaders and companions clearly striving in deeds for the ideals they profess rather than simply weaponizing such principles to gain status and cover over inner rottenness. For insincerity only breeds cynicism and decay, while authentic growth kindles hope. Number 6. The self-pitying. The perennially self-pitying also make the Stoic list of people not worth our precious time. These are those who wallow in their suffering to the point where it becomes their whole identity. They cast themselves as the helpless victim in every scenario, absolved from any responsibility or agency to improve. You can recognize the self-pitying from their tendency towards emotional reasoning filtered through catastrophic thinking. For example, if they endure a setback at work, they don't frame it as, "I need to improve in certain areas." Instead, their inner dialogue sounds more like, "I'm such a failure, I'll never advance in my career." Every minor hardship gets dramatized as another example confirming their abject misery. Now, the Stoic philosophers would distinguish between warranted grief over real loss and toxic self-pity that corrodes the soul. Seeking comfort and validation during periods of acute distress is understandable. However, the self-pitying make trauma and calamity the cornerstone of their identity and relationships. They fixate on past wounds and troubles to excuse any need for growth or responsibility in the present. This stubborn attachment to negative narratives about themselves and the world breeds only hopelessness and stagnation. As the Roman Stoic Seneca observed, we suffer more from imagination than reality. Yet the self-pitying prefer wallowing in imagined pain to acting upon reality's potential for joy and contribution. Thus, the Stoics advise us to instead spend our limited time with those oriented towards solution-finding and purpose. For when we surround ourselves with people committed to building meaning from suffering, they help ignite our own highest self. Their contagious resiliency lifts our spirits from stagnant waters of self-pity into the invigorating winds of possibility. For our souls thrive when anchored to those who see light, still waiting to emerge from even the darkest nights. Number 7. The obsequious. The Stoics also warn against spending excessive time with the obsequious, those overly eager to serve, comply with, or obediently follow others in order to gain approval. You can recognize them from their tendency to immediately align with whichever opinion in the room holds the most influence without considering its merits. They habitually shower the powerful with needless praise and favors, hoping to bask in reflective status or validation. For example, obsequious people may laugh excessively at poor jokes made by someone they wish to ingratiate themselves to. No intellectual failing or ethical breach committed by their chosen ally earns condemnation. All is speedily rationalized. If once showered with fame or prestige, their chosen avatar of insight could kick a dog and still retain faithful obedience from these hangers-on. The Stoics consider this degree of unthinking allegiance as among the most destructive character flaws. To so easily abdicate moral autonomy to remain in another's good graces plants the seeds of great evil. As Epictetus warned, you can be unconquerable if you enter into no combat in which it is not in your own control to conquer. Yet the obsequious freely relinquish their inner domain to please the mortal whims of others, abdicating the one kingdom where they might have proven unconquerable. Blind obedience and flattery also erode wisdom in the long run by insulating their recipients from constructive criticism. Yet the obsequious care more for ingratiation than positive influence or human dignity. There is an arrogant selfishness cloaked underneath eager subservience. Thus, the Stoics advise we instead seek relationships rooted in honest discourse, with obedience only granted those who earn trust by cultivating our growth. Our scarce time deserves better investment than stroking egos, or chasing ephemeral status by forfeiting principles. For chasing the fickle approval of others condemns us to flee our true selves. Number 8. The gullible. The gullible also make the Stoic list of those undeserving of our limited time. These overly trusting individuals lack the discernment to perceive when they are being deceitfully manipulated or misled. The gullible tend to naively assume the best of everyone, even in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary. For example, a swindling con artist need only make a superficial show of appearing friendly and in need for the gullible to erode all wariness. The most obvious scams elicit not skepticism but sympathy from these perennial targets. Under the guise of an improbable get-rich scheme, They happily invest their life savings into the verbal promises of a fast-talking stranger. When eventually cleaned out, they emerge penniless on the other side. They refuse to believe the nice man deliberately misled them. As the Stoic philosophers understood, indiscriminate trust and magical thinking do not represent high-minded virtues. There is an oblivious selfishness to the gullible. They project their own goodwill onto the motivations of others, regardless of troubling evidence revealing darker incentives. It is this stubborn naivety leaves them vulnerable to subtle manipulation. For con artists thrive when dealing targets happy to trade critical thinking for keeping pet delusions intact. Yet being equally gullible to our own flawed thought patterns proves the greatest danger. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." However, the gullible lack the discipline to question their subjective impressions and assumptions. They ignore the Stoic maxim to see things simply as they are rather than what we wish, fear, or assume them to be. In this way, the gullible remain trapped in patterns of self-deception and external manipulation their entire lives. Thus, the Stoics advise we instead spend our time with those who temper compassion with wisdom, those who understand that both inner truth and interpersonal goodwill require vigilant cultivation and courageous defense. For surrounding ourselves with grounded wisdom is itself a profound act of self-love in a world brimming with hucksters ever ready to exploit neurotic fears and fantasies. Number 9. The arrogant. The Stoics caution against spending unnecessary time with the arrogantly self-important. These are those individuals inflated by a false sense of superiority, which manifests in their dismissiveness and disdain towards others. You can discern the arrogant from the way they constantly stake their claim as the foremost authority in the room, issuing opinions rather than engaging in discourse. They speak in definitive declarations, rather than welcoming new data that may contradict them. When others pipe up with a conflicting viewpoint, the arrogant are quick to condescend and lecture. They seem to position themselves as the eternal teacher but never the student. This posturing stems from deep insecurity, of course, the need to constantly reaffirm an illusion of infallibility. For if forced to reckon with the limits of their knowledge, the entirety of the arrogant person's precarious edifice of self-importance might come tumbling down. Thus, they construct a carefully curated echo chamber filled only with sycophants and intimidated admirers, unlikely to challenge them. For earnest questioning risks exposing what lays behind the curtain, and unfamiliarity with wise humility. As the Stoic teacher Epictetus stated, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Yet to the arrogant, there remains little worth learning at all, only opportunities to dazzle others with oratory displays. In this way, they deny themselves the lifeblood of growth while stunting it in their subordinates. Thus, the Stoics advise we instead spend our short time accompanied by those who discuss rather than lecture, souls wide-eyed with curiosity rather than clouded by contempt. For only through discerning the lessons born even by opposing views do we inch nearer the truth. But the arrogant would much rather obfuscate facts than risk disrupting their own exalted status, as oracles supposedly possessed of all wisdom. This is why the Stoics warn against over-investing time with the arrogant. Our scarce days deserve to be spent growing through sincere discourse with the humble, not shrinking before the imperious monologues of puffed-up egos. For in the end, the arrogantly self-important live the most closed-off, starved existences, walled off from new insights by fortresses of fear and superiority. Number 10. The passive. The Stoics also caution against spending excessive time with the chronically passive, those lacking initiative, drive, motivation, and direction in their lives. You can recognize them from their tendency to respond to most invitations for goal setting or planning with a shrug and non-committal excuses. While occasional respite and reflection serve a purpose, the passive default to aimless drifting for days on end. They possess no animating ambitions or sense of purposeful self-determination. Instead of setting sail toward some unseen horizon, the passive remain perpetually adrift, letting the winds and waves determine their ultimate destination instead of making intentional choices. This is not the enlightened non-attachment the Stoics advocate, but rather an abdication of the potential for greatness nested in each soul. As Seneca wrote, "We are affected not by events themselves, but by the views we take of them." Yet the passive refuse to take ownership of their primal power to consciously author their life story each moment. So they lament the cruel twists of fate when their rudderless existence runs aground. The Stoics thus advise we instead accompany goal-oriented change agents, those awakened to co-writing their destiny through aligned thoughts, values, and actions. For when we walk beside such driven souls, their infectious optimism lifts our spirits to see roads where before we only noticed roadblocks. Their self-motivation awakens our own agency, just as their sense of accountable self-authorship inspires us to seize control of our own tale from the phantom hands of fate. For in the end, the passive never truly live. They only endure lives happening to them, rather than intentionally crafting them. And this sleepwalking existence breeds only regret and despair. Thus, the Stoic sages urge us to instead spend our days alongside those glowing with resolute determination to make their hours count. For their gritty vigor is contagious, just as the void left by aimlessness drains our own vitality. In this way, we must choose well those privileged with access to our spirit, for passive souls diminish our energy while the driven enrich us. Number 11. The ungrateful. The Stoics also caution against over-investing time trying to uplift the chronically ungrateful, those blind to the kindness and blessings already present in their lives. You can recognize the ungrateful by their tendency to gloss over or outright dismiss positive developments that warrant appreciation. For example, if you throw the ungrateful a surprise party, they will critique the food choices and music rather than recognize the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. Give them a holiday bonus at work and they privately grumble it wasn't more rather than celebrate the unexpected boon. The ungrateful live fixated on continually moving the goalposts for enough satisfaction to dawn. There exists no plateau of contentment for them, only an endless ladder with the next rung ever beckoning. Now the Stoics distinguish healthy ambition and striving to better one's situation from the chronic ingratitude that poisons the soul. Occasional frustrations over limitations warrant reflection, but maintained amidst abundance, an ungrateful spirit betrays warped priorities. As Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself and your way of thinking." Yet the ungrateful cling to external validation through endless acquisition and advancement. No quantity of blessing satiates them. Any generosity received merits only fleeting appreciation. Thus, the ungrateful live in self-inflicted poverty, unable to partake of sustaining joy and gratitude readily available to those with eyes to see it. They starve spiritually, even while feasting materially, and in their misery they will try dragging down all around them. Therefore, the Stoics urge us not to enable their distortions by seeking to fill cups with untouchable holes, but instead lift those aware of blessings overflowing should they pause to drink. Our time warrants fertile soil where seeds of efforts may bear fruit, not the parched earth of entitlement where all good things vanish without trace. Number 12. The reckless. The Stoics caution against spending excessive time with the recklessly self-destructive, those who needlessly court danger and ruin through short-sighted impulsiveness. You can recognize the reckless from their tendency to serially engage in high-risk actions without concern for consequences to themselves or others. For example, the reckless may gamble away money for essentials, or make spontaneous purchases far beyond their means. They might binge drink to excess, have random encounters without protection, or perform dangerous stunts to impress peers. If a situation promises instant pleasure despite catastrophic risk, the reckless impetuously dive in, dismissing all warnings. Their motto is, "You only live once," used to justify any manner of vice or stupidity. Now occasionally we all must take measured risks to grow. But the Stoics distinguish calculated boldness and ambition from impulsive thrill-seeking heedless of fallout. As Epictetus declared, happiness lies in ceasing to anguish over that beyond your control. Yet the reckless compulsively court disaster by fixating on momentary gratification while ignoring inevitable consequences. Like overgrown toddlers, they grab for anything shiny, sparking, or sweet with little self-restraint. Thus, the reckless often destroy in weeks what took years to cultivate. They squander talent, relationships, and public goodwill to indulge fleeting ego cravings. And in defiant denial of accountability, they perversely revel amidst the wreckage as confirmation of their free spirit flouting conventions. Yet such chaos leaves little room for learning or making amends to those harmed along the way. Therefore, tough love is required, allowing the reckless to fully feel outcomes of misdeeds. The only hope wisdom may take root when foolhardy dreams collapse. and we must set boundaries on how much their turbulence can drag down our own growth. For reckless souls will burn everything and everyone until all fuel is spent. Our time deserves better than emotional firefighting for those delighting in the flames. Number 13. The wasteful. The Stoics caution against enabling those prone to squandering their potential through chronic disorganization, distraction, or externalizing blame. You can recognize the wasteful by their talent for creating chaos rather than order. For example, the wasteful chronically miss deadlines, appointments, and opportunities despite ample preparation time. They accumulate parking tickets, late fees, and debt from forgetting basic recurring tasks. They may possess tremendous creativity and intellect, yet lack discipline to harness such gifts toward meaningful achievements. The wasteful claim big aspirations, but always find excuses why applying effort today is impossible. Now, the Stoics understand periodic struggles with distraction when building good habits and goals, but the wasteful convert such difficulties into identity, wielding diagnoses or self-assessments of neurodivergence to rationalize their eternal falling short. I just wasn't built for responsibility and planning, they sigh, abdicating rather than seeking solutions. Yet, as Seneca counsels, we suffer more often in imagination than reality. While the obstacles facing the wasteful are undoubtedly real, their self-limiting beliefs reveal needless pessimism about improving. With structure, accountability, and support, even the messiest souls can slowly build lives of purpose. But the wasteful often resist such help, preferring the comfort of their victimhood narratives. Thus, the Stoics caution against supporting them via enabling and excuse-making around repetitive irresponsibility. Compassionate aid must be tempered with allowing natural consequences to inspire maturation. For coddling the wasteful's delusions of helpless nobility only prolongs their suffering. Tough love provides the only hope of one day overcoming barriers to reach long-dormant potential. If you are listening to this, thank you for staying till the end. If you feel any of these Stoic lessons resonated with you today, feel free to start a Stoic discussion in the comments. I welcome Stoic discussions as they are what the great Stoics like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca advised for. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, and if you want more content like this, subscribe and hit the bell. Thank you for watching, and as always, I hope you find peace and serenity in the Stoic ways.